This episode of Food Psych is brought to you by my online course, Intuitive Eating Fundamentals. If you're ready to leave diet culture behind and reclaim the life it stole from you, learn more and sign up at christyharrison.com/course. That's christyharrison.com/course. Welcome to Food Psych, a podcast about intuitive eating, health at every size, body liberation, and taking down diet culture. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and I'm an anti-diet registered dietitian and certified intuitive eating counselor, offering online courses and programs to help people all over the world make peace with food. Join me here every week as I talk with interesting people from all walks of life about their relationships with food and their bodies.
I remember I was teething, little gums bleeding, cried every evening, it was all about eating. When I became a teen, it was all about beef, and now I'm ready for the world. Try and sink my teeth in, stacking extra.
Hey there, welcome to episode 162 of Food Psych. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and today I'm talking with Victoria Welsby, a body image activist and confidence coach whom you may know from her brand and her social media handles Bam Pow Life. We talked about the connection between self-esteem and intuitive eating, how to heal from trauma related to food and body, fighting back against internalized fat phobia and body shame, and a whole lot more. So that's coming up in just a moment. It's a really great one, and she has overcome so much in her life. She has such an inspiring story, so I can't wait to share that with you. But first, a quick announcement. I've mentioned this a couple of times before in passing, but I just wanted to remind you and sort of formally say that in a couple of weeks, we're going to be taking a summer hiatus from the first week in August through Labor Day. So this is to give me some time to work on my book, since the deadline to turn in my manuscript is in the fall. It's fast approaching, and I'm kind of overwhelmed with how many words I still have left to write. It's going really well, but I just need to have a little more time to focus on it. So we'll be reposting some of our best episodes from the archives during the time of our hiatus, so that you'll always have something to listen to while I'm gone. And the hiatus won't start for another couple of weeks, so you still have new episodes every week for the rest of July. Just wanted to give you the heads up now so that it doesn't come out of the blue in August in a couple of weeks. Okay, so now I'll answer this week's listener question. It's from a listener named Robin, who writes, "Hi, Christy. Your podcast has been so helpful to me as I'm beginning my recovery, so thank you. My question is twofold, as I am a new mom and a school counselor. How can I try to dissuade my middle school girls and boys when they begin to subscribe to diet culture and body shaming? And two, I'm a new mom with a lot of associations and energy around food, so what is the best way to raise a child in a healthy way regarding body image and intuitive eating? Any advice and/or resources would be greatly appreciated." So thanks, Robin, for that great question. And before I answer, just my standard disclaimer that these answers are for informational and educational purposes only and aren't meant as a substitute for individual medical or mental health advice. So first of all, I want to say that it's awesome that you're doing this. The kids in your life are so lucky to have you. They're so lucky to have someone who's reflecting on their own relationship with food and working to help them have a better relationship with food themselves, because so many kids don't have that. So you're really doing them a service. That's awesome. I will say for your kids in middle school, you know, the ones that you teach or counsel, this age group can be so rebellious, right? I'm sure you've seen that. So I think the best approach is not trying to actively argue with them or dissuade them from what they're doing, because often they'll just dig in their heels and want to do it more because someone is telling them not to. But instead, like asking questions and planting seeds of why diet culture isn't in their best interest and helping them come to that realization on their own. So I spoke about this a bit with Elizabeth Scott in episode 160. You can check that out for our discussion around that. But we talked about the idea that kids this age have a rebellious spirit that can be channeled towards recognizing diet culture as manipulating them, because, you know, tweens and teenagers have this very strong knee-jerk reaction against being manipulated, right? They don't want that to be happening. And if they recognize that that's happening, their rebellious energy can go towards smashing down diet culture. And so helping them see that diet culture pretends to be about giving them freedom, pretends to be about giving them happiness and the things that they want, but actually it's about keeping them imprisoned in a really destructive system that just enriches the diet industry and the multi-billion-dollar weight loss industry at the expense of human beings and at the expense of people's mental and physical health. So I think that's a really good way to go, you know, not being like strident about this stuff, but sort of planting seeds about this and being like, well, actually, I wonder if you've ever thought about this. And depending on how politically engaged the kids are, you can probably use that as leverage as well. Like if someone is really engaged on progressive causes, you see them with protest signs, or they talk to you about going to protests or running for office at the school so they can make changes there, or whatever it is, you might be able to sort of plant the seed for for them that opposing diet culture is a political act and that there are all these sort of political forces on people that try to keep them stuck in diet culture to undermine their agency and their ability to help make change in the world, especially for women and femmes, for trans folks, for anyone who doesn't really fit the norms of supposed masculine and feminine identity. Diet culture really keeps them stuck spinning their wheels instead of being able to advocate for the cause that they believe in, being able to fight for justice and their own rights. So that's, I think, a really important idea to bring into these kids' minds. And I think they're at an age, middle school kids are at an age where they can absorb that information and understand that like this is a larger system of oppression and be really pissed off and eager to smash down systems of oppression. So another point that I would make too is to say that like you can ask questions, you can sort of plant seeds of self-reflection in these kids. So like asking, why do you feel the need to degrade yourself like that if you hear them making self-deprecating comments about their body or about food? Or how is it making you feel to think like that? How is it making you feel to talk to yourself like that? And getting them to reflect that it feels bad to be doing this, that there are certain thoughts that can be harmful and there are certain thoughts that can be helpful. And I think that's a really positive and important message to model to kids at this age and really to people of all ages, is that certain thoughts can hurt you. Certain thoughts can keep you stuck, can undermine your confidence, can undermine your ability to function in the world. And other thoughts can help you flourish. Other thoughts can propel you forward. And that you have the choice in your own mind to decide whether you're going to give voice to certain thoughts or not. You have the choice to allow yourself to continue in destructive thought patterns or to try to change them. And I think that's something that, I didn't learn that until I was an adult. I didn't learn that my habitual thoughts, my self-critical thoughts that I was walking around with all the time were actually hurting me and making me feel more depressed, more anxious, all of these things that I was desperately trying to run away from by doing things like disordered eating and other self-destructive behaviors, because I thought those behaviors, erroneously, I thought those behaviors were going to help me escape the bad feelings, and didn't understand that the bad feelings were actually coming from the self-critical thoughts and the negative beliefs that I had about myself that I had bought into from the larger culture, from what I was socialized in my family, things that have been passed down to me through generations, all had this impact on how my thought patterns from day to day. And I'm sure a lot of you listening have had the same experience, learning about self-compassion, learning that you don't actually have to shrink your body to be okay. You don't have to diet, and you don't have to be on the latest, quote unquote, wellness fad to take care of your health, that mental health is just as important as physical health. All of these concepts are so revolutionary to folks in our culture, and I really wish they weren't. I really wish they were just basic foundational concepts instead of being so revolutionary. And the fact that they are so revolutionary just shows how far we have to go in breaking down systems of oppression in our culture. So if you can, help teach these kids at this sort of vulnerable age as they're starting to emerge into adolescence and eventually adulthood, if you can teach them how to ask themselves about their thoughts, how to engage with their thoughts and recognize that they are not their thoughts and that certain thoughts might be harmful and they can decide to, walk away from them. They can decide to not internalize them. I think that's going to serve them really well in becoming self-actualized people and happy people as adults too. So I think that's a really helpful thing, is just to start asking questions, start helping them get some distance from their thoughts and their beliefs and say, how is it making you feel to believe this about yourself? Because a lot of people have never asked themselves that question, and these kids probably haven't either. So you can be planting a seed there. And really do think of it as planting a seed, because even if they brush it off or they tell you you're being too dramatic or whatever when you talk to them about diet culture, they are going to listen to you. They do have a seed planted. You've told them something that maybe they don't know, or you've gotten them to reflect on something that they didn't reflect on before, which is like, how are these thoughts harming you? And so I think that planting a seed is a huge deal in this, really for anyone, but especially at this vulnerable age, just to give them a little bit of doubt, a little bit of discrepancy around what they're absorbing from diet culture, and a window into, oh, maybe not everybody thinks this way. Maybe there is another way. And in terms of your own relationship with food and your body, and trying to not pass it on to your child, and also not pass it on to your kids that you're working with too. I think reading the book Intuitive Eating, the third edition, be sure you get the third edition, is a great start. And there's a whole chapter towards the end of the book about raising kids as intuitive eaters. So that would be really helpful, I think, for your own child and also just for conceptualizing how kids relate to food and how you can relate to food in a more peaceful way as well. And I should say, you mentioned you're starting your recovery. So I don't know if that means just your recovery from diet culture and chronic dieting, or if you have an active eating disorder. If it's the latter, if it's an active eating disorder at the moment, I wouldn't necessarily read the full book Intuitive Eating, but maybe skip ahead to the chapter about raising kids as intuitive eaters, because you're probably working with a treatment team. Hopefully you're working with a treatment team to overcome your eating disorder. And there's a lot of steps you have to go through first before you can get to intuitive eating, which is our birthright. It's how we're all born, knowing how to eat. It's the default mode, as I always say. So we can all get back there. But if you have a full-blown eating disorder, you're really far to the other side of the spectrum from intuitive eating. And so there's a lot of steps to go to before you can get back to that. So if your recovery is more just from chronic dieting and diet culture, not really disordered behaviors or a diagnosed eating disorder, you might try reading the book Intuitive Eating. I think that'd be a great step. And if you are recovering from a full-blown eating disorder, save that for later in your recovery. But the book Intuitive Eating, wherever you are in that process, that chapter at the end about raising kids as intuitive eaters, I think is really helpful. And then also there's a book called Your Child's Weight, Helping Without Harming, that a lot of parents I know have found really helpful. It's by a woman named Ellen Satter, who's a dietitian who specializes in helping with child feeding issues. And her work in general is really great for helping raise kids with a good connection to their body, a good connection to their own wisdom about food. And her model is basically like intuitive eating, but slightly more structured than the version of intuitive eating for adults, which is helpful because kids really need a little more structure. They need someone else to prepare and serve food for them, right? So there has to be some structure there so that they know their next meal or snack is coming soon, so that they're not fending for themselves, so that there's food available when they need it, so they don't get so hungry that they have a meltdown, because that often happens with toddlers and even little babies, right? They probably, now they're just crying. They are kind of melting down if they're hungry, and they're telling you in no uncertain terms that they're hungry. But once kids learn how to talk and start, running around a bunch and stuff like that, they might tell you that they're hungry, or they might just have a tantrum. Their use of words to describe their feeling states is not always 100% there yet for that young toddler age. So it's really helpful for warding off those meltdowns, those low blood sugar crashes, to just have set meal times really regularly throughout the day and set snack times throughout the day so that the kid is never going too long without food or eating, and to always have snacks and stuff available too. So definitely would recommend checking out that book and also checking out Ellen Satter's work in general. Just a word of caution, though, if you do dig into her work in general, her website has some unfortunately weight stigmatizing language that I think wasn't there before. I think they just did a redesign, and suddenly some of this quote unquote childhood obesity stuff showed up on the website, which is, disconcerting. But her model itself and the content itself of her books is totally weight inclusive and very much in line with intuitive eating and health at every size. So definitely check that out, with that caveat that maybe some of the stuff on her website is a little problematic. So you can check out her work at ellensatterinstitute.org, and Ellen Satter is spelled ELLYNSATTER. So I hope that helps. And for those of you who want to submit your own question for a chance to have it answered on an upcoming episode, go to christyharrison.com/questions and you can submit yours there. That's christyharrison.com/questions. And then if you want a whole library of answers from me to help you master intuitive eating, plus the chance to ask me any question you want and have me answer it in a more timely manner than this, you can join my intuitive eating online course at christyharrison.com/course. That's christyharrison.com/course. Also, here's something exciting for all you new moms out there, maybe Robin who asked the question, or anyone else who's just had a baby recently or is pregnant. If you want to help advance research on body image healing, my friend and fellow Health at Every Size dietitian and two-time past podcast guest Rebecca Scritchfield is the co-investigator of a new study on body image in pregnancy and postpartum at UNC Charlotte. So, if you're a woman who is currently pregnant or with at least one child under 5, and you've read or are willing to read Rebecca's book, Body Kindness, you qualify for the study. So you can go to bodykindnessbook.com/research to learn more and find out how you can download a free Body Kindness ebook to read before taking the survey. You'll also get a free e-training and downloadable resources for body kindness after baby after you complete the survey. So help out with this research. It's so important, and I really am so grateful for Rebecca for doing this. Just go to bodykindnessbook.com/research to learn more. This episode is brought to you by Tomboy X. I'm so freaking psyched to have them as a sponsor because their company is built on inclusiveness from the ground up in terms of size, in terms of gender identity, and everything else. And they make super cute, comfortable underwear that's designed to fit both your body and how you see yourself. Tomboy X has everything from bikinis, briefs, boxer briefs, trunks, and boy shorts to soft bras and racerback bras. And they're all in everyday basic colors and fun seasonal prints like skulls and daisies and octopus print, which is currently my fave, although it's vying with skulls for my favorite because that's super cute too. So regardless of where you fall on the size or gender spectrum, Tomboy X offers amazing underwear that any body can feel comfortable in. Go to tomboyx.com/foodpsych and check out their special bundles and pack pricing. Food Psych listeners also get an extra 15% off with the code FOODPSYCH. That's FOODPSYCH, all one word. Again, just use the code FOODPSYCH for an extra 15% off. Ditch whatever you're wearing for a pair of Tomboy X underwear. Go to tomboyx.com/foodpsych. And now, without any further ado, let's go talk to Victoria Welsby. So tell me about your relationship with food growing up.
So my relationship with food was kind of complicated, as I guess a lot of people's is. So I grew up in a poor household, and so we had a limited supply of food. And on top of that, one of my family members suffered from bulimia. And so the limited food that we had would disappear very quickly as soon as it came into the house. And then the third layer on that was that my mum was very fat phobic, and she really believed that she was this beast of a woman, even though she was this tiny little Irish lady she is. And so she'd always be saying things like, oh, I mustn't eat that. And, oh, you mustn't eat that. And so there's a lot of diet culture there. So it was kind of confusing for me because food was scarce. And as well, another layer is that I was rewarded with food. And so whenever I did anything good, which was quite often, I was a geeky little kid and would do lots of good things. And so then I'd get rewarded with food too. And so it was super confusing because it was like, food is bad, but here's a reward of food. And I was just like, oh I don't understand. And there is no food and I want the food. And so I had, some very powerful lessons to begin with in my childhood.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of mixed messages also.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
What was that like to experience food scarcity that way? What did that do to your relationship with food when food was there?
So it made me covet it like that. It was this magnificent, thing that I could never quite get a hold of. And whenever something interesting came into the house, it was just this excited, joyful feeling of, oh my God, we have like fresh bread, or we have, it's so funny looking back, you're like, really? I really liked those things. Like corned beef in a can. I'd be like, oh my God, corned beef in a can. And now I'm like, oh, gross. And so it would be so joyful and wonderful. And we will be allowed to eat the food, but not too much, and only for a certain period of time. So on Sundays is when we'd get our weekly shopping. And so on Sundays, my mum would be like, okay, let's make a fry up, which is like a British thing of a fried breakfast. And do you want to fry up? And we'd all be like, yes. And it'd be really joyful and happy. But then when it came to Monday, it was kind of like, well, you have to stop eating now. And the food is all gone anyway. And it was, you wanted to get that joy back that you experienced with the communal family thing. But then, my parents' attitudes has changed, being like, why do you want more food? You greedy? Like, what's going on here? And so it's quite confusing.
Yeah, definitely. Really mixed messages. And of course, it's so normal that you would want more food. Like as a kid experiencing that kind of deprivation, it's like it's a trauma really. And being restricted of food like that, of course, will make anyone want food and desperate for food.
Right, totally. And then when we didn't have food, so a lot of the times we had no food in the cupboards, I would try and eat things that were not necessarily food items. So, for example, I would eat uncooked pasta. And I would eat, sometimes we'd have things like Weetabix, but we wouldn't have any milk. And so I'd eat just like a dry Weetabix and things like that. Just anything to try and get that, get food. And it made me feel like an animal because I was so desperate for food. I was eating things that, were not the optimum thing that I should have had.
Yeah. Oh, that's so painful.
Mm.
It's interesting. I sort of identify with that because I was never food insecure, but in my eating disorder days, I was restricting food so much. And at the time it was like Atkins and low carb. It was like the early 2000s and the whole low carb thing was so huge. So I didn't have any carbs in the house and I was desperate for carbs. And so I would find myself eating like weird concoction. Like I would make like cookie dough, but it wasn't real. It wasn't a recipe. It was just like flour and butter and sugar mixed together. And I would eat it and feel like super embarrassed. All right, pancake mix, and I was just like, who am I? Why am I eating raw pancake mix? I felt so ashamed. But like you said, like such an animal, but it's like, that's an interesting choice of words because it's like, it's sort of a shaming word, but it's also, that's our animal instinct coming through. It's like we need that food. Of course we need food to survive. So it's, the animal instinct kind of drives us to find it in whatever way, shape, or form we can.
Yeah, isn't that wild? And I'm just thinking, it made me realize that, so I had a pet budgie and I would eat the budgie's bird food. And I would take it in like a little bag to school and I'd like nibble on it because in my mind, it was like a healthy thing to do. And I remember my mum saying, don't eat that. Like rats have been in the bird food or whatever, like whenever it's stored before it came to our house. And me thinking, oh, like this is the one food I'm allowed to eat sort of thing because it's quote unquote healthy. Birdseed. It's like, it's mad, right?
Totally. Oh, yeah. And it's so interesting that there were so many strictures, so many rules, it sounds like, on your relationship with food, because not only was it oftentimes not there, but also you were shamed for eating particular things and you were supposed to be quote unquote healthy. So what a like razor's edge to have to walk.
Exactly. And another layer was that my dad really found joy in food and cooking. He was a great cook and he would have nice things. So he had some like nice food, things like a chocolate milkshake with cream on top or something like that. He would have this special food and sometimes we'd be allowed to have it. But on the other side, my dad was an alcoholic. And so we really saw him, in my mind, I saw him as this person that was out of control, and linking that with his food consumption too, of, he's an alcoholic, he's out of control, and therefore eating quote unquote like nice things is another way that you're out of control. And so to be a morally pure person, it's better if I restrict myself so I don't end up like my dad. And it's kind of interesting.
It is, yeah. And so really dovetails with diet culture's beliefs about what's out of control and what's bad and what's morally pure too. So it seems like you probably got it reinforced from outside as well.
Yeah, totally. 100%.
That's really so painful and just sounds like such trauma around food from such a young age.
Yeah. And we were talking before about me writing my book. And so I went to my therapist who I've been seeing for years. And I was like, let's go through old stuff so that I could be reminded of how I used to think. Because sometimes, when you work on yourself, it's really hard to remember how you used to think and believe. Because you're like, well, I'm no longer like that. Anyway, and so we started talking about my younger stuff, because I guess that's where we started in therapy. And she was telling me all these things that I had said, and I was like, damn, I forgot about this. And because I had suffered from PTSD, from trauma through different things in my life, I really recognize these things as trauma, and really traumatic things that had happened around food. And so I really learned that food is bad. I am so greedy. I'm out of control. I'm some sort of, food gobbling monster sort of thing. And my mum is really mad at me for desiring food. And one instance, we had Cocoa Pops. I don't know what you call it in the States, like chocolate Rice Krispies.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And so obviously this was like this, oh my God, I can't believe it. We have Cocoa Pops. And so I had a bowl of Cocoa Pops and I said to my mum, I want another bowl. And she said no, because she wanted other family members to have Cocoa Pops. And I was like, please, 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 please. And my mum's reaction, she must have been very stressed out, or I must have been begging, or whatever was going on in her mind. Her reaction was to slap me across the face and then say, like, here, have your Cocoa Pops. And I remember her shutting me in the kitchen with my Cocoa Pops. And as I sat on the floor crying into them and eating them and being like, well, at least I have my Cocoa Pops, even if my mum is so mad at me and thinks that I'm disgusting and out of control. And yeah, that was like a really powerful lesson of how out of control that I thought that I was, but wasn't.
Seriously, right. It's like, of course, another bowl of Cocoa Pops because you're probably ravenous because you don't have enough food.
Yeah, I probably had never had Cocoa Pops ever before because that's what the rich kids would eat,
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Oh my God, that's so painful. Yeah, so that must have been just such a setup for disordered eating.
Oh, yeah. And so I started sneaking food whenever I could. And yeah, late at night when my mum had gone to bed, I'd come downstairs and get whatever food I could. And then when I then felt guilty, obviously, because I had eaten food. And so then to compensate, I would over-exercise like mad, and I would not eat anything during the day. So I'd eat breakfast, but then at school, I wouldn't eat anything. And that would make me feel it would be repentance, I'd feel proud that the other kids at school would see that, oh, the fat girl is not eating anything. She must be a good fatty because she knows she's this bad person because she's fat and she's doing something about it, sort of thing. So I had pride in the fact that I'm someone who over-exercises and doesn't eat food in public and during the day. Obviously, it made no difference to who I was physically. And I had this idea that the worse that food tasted, the better, the healthier it was. And so I'd have things like just boiled pasta, nothing on it. And I'd be like, oh, I'm so healthy because I'm eating this boiled pasta. Like, because if you say to a kid, lose weight, they don't know how to lose weight,
No, of course not.
And so I was doing all of the things that I thought was gonna get me more love from my family when I suddenly became this very thin child, and they'd be like, oh my God, what are you doing? How did you do that?
This fantasy of how it would be and what thinness meant to you, which sounds like was, acceptance probably.
Yeah, totally. I dreamed about the day where I would dream about developing eating disorders so that I could become sick so that my family could see that I was worthy of love because I'm so dedicated to becoming thin that I've made myself sick. Man, and I think back and I'm like, oh, I just want to go give like young Victoria a hug and be like, don't worry about it. No, it's okay. Because it's really, really sad.
Yeah, and it sounds like what you really needed was love and acceptance, and so nice that you can sort of mentally go back there and do that now. But like at the time, it sounds like you were just desperate for that love and that acceptance.
Yeah, and doing anything for it. Like I would have done anything if someone said like, I don't know, eat a piece of dog poo and you'll be thin. I would have been like, give it to me, done. Like I was so desperate to get there. And back as well, I wasn't really fat. I was, as a younger child, I was maybe like very slightly chubby, but there's no way you'd be like, oh my God, like, yeah, that's a fat kid. But then I did become fat, which is another thing. I'm just like, wow, how can you say to that child that she was fat when she wasn't? Not that there's nothing wrong with being fat, but yeah, it's kind of interesting.
That's been such a common theme actually on the podcast of like people who are in fat bodies now being like, I thought I was so fat as a kid and I wasn't. And there's nothing wrong with being fat, but I was not fat. And why did people tell me I was?
Yeah, I know. I had Jess Baker say that, and I was like, damn.
Hmm.
And yeah, and then looking back at photos, I'm just like, oh my God, what a little cute little angel I was. And remembering at that very time thinking, oh my God, what sort of, beast I was. And I wasn't at all.
It sounds like your mom's really disordered thinking about food and bodies got really lodged in there and transmitted to you.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And as well, because she would describe herself as fat, and she has never been anything but very slim. And she'd always say, I'm the fat one of my sisters, and she has 9 sisters, and they're all slim. And I'd look at her and be like, well, if you're fat, what does that make me as like a very slightly chubby child? I must be, really grotesque because she was thin, basically.
I think that's such a common thing that people who are objectively thin will call themselves fat. And, kids in the vicinity or people who are actually fat in the vicinity, it's like, what does that make me then? And, hearing them denigrate themselves like that, saying it as a denigrating term, not saying it as an objective, fact about bodies that has no judgment, but like saying it to cut themselves down. Like, of course, someone's going to absorb that and be like, well, I guess being fat's really bad then. And I guess I must be ginormous if this person's saying they're fat.
Yeah, totally. And I never recognized that my mum wasn't fat at that time. I always just presumed, oh yeah, my mum's, a fat person. And then as an adult looking back and being like, what? No, she ain't. Like, what the heck? Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. So oh my gosh, it must have been so confusing. And like you were just your barometer of what was fat and what was not was so skewed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
So where did it go from there? It sounds like that was sort of like young childhood. How did things unfold as you got a little older?
Yeah. So as you can probably tell, I had very low self-esteem in general. And because of being a fat person, so by the time I was 16, I was fat. And I thought that being fat was something that was a failing of my personality, of my character, and therefore I deserved less. And so when I was 17, my mum moved away back to Ireland, where she's from, and I convinced her. I said, "Hey, don't worry, I'm going to stay here and finish my schooling and blah blah blah."
Was your dad in the picture at that time at all, or?
He was, but he had just had a liver transplant because of his alcoholism, and he was not in a good place. Like, he was basically, they were divorced, and he was not there, basically. So at 17, she moved away, and then I realized that, actually, I don't know how to live as an adult, and I don't actually have any money to pay for rent. And 18-year-olds are the only ones who can rent houses. You can't rent a place when you're 17. And because I was a child, I didn't work any of this out before my mum left. And so then I ended up homeless, which was a massive deal. But at the time I was like, well, someone like me, do I really deserve a roof over my head? Is it really that big a deal that I'm living in this homeless shelter? And at the same time, I met a guy who was 30 when I was 17. And now I'm like, oh no,
stay away.
Run for the hills.
Seriously.
But at the time I was like, oh my God, this handsome guy is interested in me because, I'm so youthful and wonderful. And turned out he was abusive. But within a couple of weeks of meeting, he moved me in to his place to live with his mum and their 4 cats. And it was a really bad situation. So a part of his abuse was to, I'd say, put me on a diet. I'm using in quotations, aka he starved me. So he decided that I was too fat and said, okay, so I'm going to manage what you eat from now on. And this is what you're allowed to eat exactly. And if I deviated from that exact menu at all, and he found out, then I'd be in really big trouble. So I was still in this like food sneaking behavior when I met him. And so then it just intensified. And, anytime he left the house, I'd be thinking, what can I sneak that he's not going to notice? So, for example, with the bread, he'd count the slices of bread that was in the loaf. And so if he came back and there was like one less, he'd be like, what's going on here? And so I'd have to eat something that wasn't something he could count. Or I would go out to spend time with a friend and try and eat food there. So yeah, I remember ordering a pizza with a friend, and she ordered a pizza and her boyfriend ordered a pizza, and then I ordered a pizza, and I ordered like the quote unquote healthiest version of the pizza, and then only ate and then had to take the pizza back as evidence of I didn't eat the pizza so that he could eat the pizza, to show I'm so well behaved.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And I remember my friends at the time being like, why you ain't eating your pizza? And I'd be like, oh, I'm not full. I'm full. I don't want, anymore. And yeah. So when I could eat for real, it was just feverish trying to eat so that I could have some food and also that he wouldn't find out. So if a friend made dinner, for example, it would just be like, oh my God, I'm allowed to eat something. But then I would know that I'd get in trouble later because he'd be like, well, what did you do around there? Oh, you had dinner. Oh, what did you eat? And, he couldn't manage it. He couldn't control how much I had eaten. He couldn't, come around and watch sort of thing. So it was kind of dangerous for me to do that as well. So it was really, it was dangerous. It was not safe for me to eat food, like literally.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Oh, that sounds horrifying. And like sort of replicating your trauma with food as a child, but in such a big way, like in kind of a higher stakes way, it sounds like.
Yeah. And I didn't think, oh, this is abuse. I thought, wow, he sees in me that I am just so out of control that because he loves me, he's taking over this whole eating thing, because if it was up to me, then I would just be wild and eating whatever I want sort of thing. And so I didn't think it was a bad thing. I thought it's love. And whenever I did eat something outside of this plan that he had, I just felt awful. I felt so guilty and out of control. And I didn't think it was a good thing that I ate anything outside of the diet he'd come up with.
Your poor body, meanwhile, was just like, give me food. Like, of course, it just needed it.
I know. Like, at the time, I remember waking up and the very first thing that I'd think about is food. And being like, I need to go to some Overeaters Anonymous thing because all I think about is food. There's something wrong with my brain. And it never clicked in my mind that it's because I needed food. Like, my body's like, please, Victoria, just give us something.
Anything.
Yeah. And, it didn't. Yeah. I was just like, wow, I'm so bad. I'm such a bad person. And as soon as I eat in my then I'd be thinking, how many hours until lunch so that I can eat the next thing that I'm allowed? And it'd just be like counting down and being like, oh my God, can I wait that long? And yeah, I just thought I was a bad person.
Oh, that's so painful. And I feel like that's the idea of needing to go to Overeaters Anonymous because you're so bad is like something that, this was a clearly very abusive situation, but there's so many situations that are abusive in different ways that make us feel like that. Like I went through the same thing of feeling like, oh my God, I need to go to Overeaters Anonymous. I'm out of control. I can't stop binging. I'm binging every night, and not looking at or acknowledging, because someone had tried to tell me, I had been with a therapist who tried to tell me this, but like eating more during the day, eating more earlier in the day would be maybe a antidote to that, and that I just needed more food, and that when I woke up in the morning thinking of food, or when I dreamed about food at night and food like invaded my dreams, it was because I was hungry. It was because I needed food.
But we don't think that though, right? You think, well, how can it be when I'm so greedy and I eat everything?
Yes.
And the reality is you're not greedy and you're not eating everything. That was another thing that my therapist had reminded me about. I was quote unquote confessing to her about what I had eaten in a day, because I had put on a tiny amount of weight, and I was very upset about it in our therapy session. And she was trying to get down to like what's actually going on here. And I was just like, I'm out of control with my eating. And she was like, what do you eat? And I was basically like, oh, I eat, a piece of dust and a piece of lettuce, and that's it. And she didn't, at the time she didn't say like, bitch, like that's nothing. But we were like laughing about it because I was like, confessing to her about like what a gluttonous slob that I was. And we both were like, man, you need to eat more food. And yeah, now I do. And I'm like, wow, yeah, no wonder when I'm like, oh, I had like 3 peanuts and, I was so greedy because I had 3.
Right.
You're like, oh my God.
Ridiculous. Oh.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the power of diet culture to skew things so much, and also of fat phobia, because, it sounds like from such a young age, you got instilled with this belief that if you're fat, it's bad, and it means you're greedy, and it means you're out of control, and you're not allowed to take care of yourself or have your needs met at all if you're fat.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like being fat was the worst thing that I could do as a human being. Like if I murdered a bunch of kittens, then, that wouldn't be as bad as being a fat person, because it would be, being fat, like should have been like a criminal offense in my mind.
And I feel like it is kind of this like paramount cardinal sin to so many people without actually realizing it, without acknowledging it. And when you say like murder a bag of kittens or whatever, it's like that is clearly such a morally reprehensible thing to do. And like existing in a fat body is so not even like anything compared to that. But people build it up and make it this sort of outsized thing.
Yeah. Totally.
I mean, it's diet culture really that does that. I think we all internalize it and we apply it to ourselves and flagellate ourselves with it. But we wouldn't believe that if it hadn't been taught to us.
Yeah, right. And it's just so powerful. And logically, we can look at it and be like, well, being, a bad person is worse than being fat. But you feel it in your bones that fat is bad when you're in diet culture.
Mm-hmm. And everything reinforces it. Everything around you reinforces it. Like all the media we take in, even at very subtle levels, like making the villainous character fat and making the good characters thin, or, these really like coded sort of messages that we don't always notice consciously, but that just reinforce that sense of like fat is bad, that sort of droning belief in our heads.
Yeah, totally. And it's everywhere. From the time we have any concept of who we are as a human being, we know what we should look like.
Yeah, it's in children's cartoons and books. Mm-hmm. It's horrifying. My 3-year-old nephew is already like, oh God. Last weekend, we were at a family event and eating at this big, long table outside. And after dinner, he got up and started running circles around the table. And he's like, I got to exercise to be healthy. And we're like, how did you? What? My husband and I were like, oh my God, what is happening? Like, this kid where is he getting this? Yeah. Unbelievable.
Oh my God. I don't know where I saw it or I heard it, or I was talking to someone and I was saying, oh, there's this new body positive Barbie thing, blah, blah, blah. And they were like, well, I don't know. And they were talking about Peppa Pig and how Peppa Pig is constantly saying to her dad that he's got a fat tummy. And that's like part of the cartoon. And this person's child was like, I don't think this is good. And because they have a body positive mum to be able to spot that. But it's so funny that someone who'd make cartoons for a kid would just be like, what are we going to put in here? I know, let's do some fat shaming.
Yeah.
Like, it's just wild.
It's unbelievable. And it really speaks to how cultural it is, like this is exactly how it gets passed down from generation to generation, because kids learn this so young and they absorb these messages, and people who put them in are probably not even thinking that this is. I actually just spoke with someone earlier on the podcast who's a TV writer and who was saying like, if she tries to call out like fellow writers or whatever on the show, she's also Black. And she was like, I'll call them out about racism and they're like afraid and they're like, they'll back off quickly and be like, okay, I'll take out that racist joke. But if she calls them out about fat phobia, they're like, whatever, it's not, they don't even think of it as like a big deal. And I think that's really this, speaks to how entrenched diet culture is, that people are like, it's not really discrimination, whereas if freaking Peppa Pig was like spouting off about, racist beliefs, like everybody would be up in arms and that shit would be canceled so fast,
Right. And it's like changing the minds of kids and everyone around by watching it. So it's why just not be a dick? Why not make a cartoon and just make it inclusive? It just doesn't make sense in my brain.
Yeah, no, it makes absolutely no sense because kids are so innocent and have no prejudices when they're born. And if you can like cultivate that and keep also their connection with their intuitive eating skills that they have from birth, what a better life everyone would have.
I know. Oh, can you imagine?
Yeah. It's the kind of world I want. But it gives me hope when you hear about kids like your friend's kid who was like, I don't think so, when kids can question that stuff.
I'm just like, wow, how wicked is that kid to be able to be like, because
I know.
Like even adults wouldn't even pick up on it.
I know. I want to know like parenting tips from that friend of yours because I'm like, if I ever, hopefully in the next couple of years we'll pop out a kid or two, and like I'm just horrified, trying to bring a kid up in this world.
Yeah, because they're gonna go outside like the bubble that you want to create for them and pick up stuff. So yeah,
they're gonna go to a friend's house and watch something like that, or
hear a friend's mum being like, "Oh, don't eat that," or whatever. But I guess if you've already kind of indoctrinated them into trusting themselves and blah, 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 then they might be able to be like, that doesn't sit right.
Mm-hmm. That's it. Like, I think the self-esteem thing is such a huge piece of this too, because like how you were saying you had such low self-esteem from all the trauma and then having that reinforced by all the fat phobia and the food shaming and stuff, like, it's so easy then to feel like, well, this is what I deserve. And like, this is all there is, And I think if, giving kids good self-esteem all around is a way, and I've felt that, I'm sure want to talk about how kind of your journey out of that too, because I'm sure in your own life as well, like there's been a shift in terms of your self-esteem and valuing yourself more to the point where you can be like, yeah, I would never go for that 30-year-old guy if I was 17 again now with the things I know now, or I would never do that to myself with those, starvation diets. But
yeah, because when you have self-esteem and something doesn't feel right, you trust yourself versus sweeping that little niggly doubt under the carpet. And knowing that you do deserve better. And you do. We all do. We all deserve the best.
We really do. And we deserve to listen to that intuition because it really is a great guide. But yeah, when we've been disconnected from it sort of forcibly by diet culture, it's so easy to be like, well, that doesn't matter. And that's just, I don't know what that is. That's me being out of control, rather than, oh, that's my body's wisdom telling me something important.
Yeah. And it's interesting how it's, with intuitive eating and then taking that intuition that you have naturally in other areas of your life and how it's tied together. And so general self-esteem around general life issues, how that could bleed into intuitive eating as well, and how effective you are with that or not.
Yeah, I think it's such a basis for intuitive eating, and intuitive eating also informs self-esteem. Like I've had so many people that I've worked with say, oh my God, now that I'm able to tune into my body around food, I'm also tuning into my body about like how I feel about my job or how I feel about, this person that I'm hanging out with that I don't really want to be anymore because I'm finally recognizing that, it's like it spills over.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So cool. So yeah, tell me about that journey. Like, how did you go from this abusive relationship at 17 to where you are now?
Yeah. So after a couple of years, I managed to get away from this guy, and I slowly started to create a quote unquote normal life. So, no abuse, no wild things happening, but still I deeply believed that I needed to be thin. Continued dieting and didn't see any success because, as we all know, diets don't work. And so I realized because of all the trauma that I'd experienced in my life, I needed to go to therapy. And so I started going to therapy and I started healing all of these different areas within my life in regards to getting a better job, finding a better partner, getting better friends, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I was at this great place in my life where I had a very successful job, and on paper, I looked like I was, I had a great life, but still I carried this deep shame about being fat. And I believe that I was so successful in my career and I was such a great friend and such a great spouse because I was making up for the fact that I was fat and that people were overlooking this flaw, and a guy would still date me even though I had this horrific body, and people would still promote me even though I was fat. And so to thank them, I would overperform like bananas. And so I just remember saying to my therapist, like, I'm just so scared that one day I won't be able to become thin. And what if I need to believe that I can become thin. And so I got into being like, yes, you can do it. You can. You've achieved everything you've ever wanted to achieve, sort of thing. And it just wasn't working at all, no matter what I did. And at around this same time, I discovered Reagan Chastain's blog, Dances with Fat. And I was like, shut the fuck up. What the heck is this? And basically what I was reading is, hey, it's okay to be fat. And hey, you have rights as a fat person. And I was like, what? What do you mean it's okay to be fat? What? This is mind-blowing stuff. And from there, I really started just devouring information and being like, what the fuck? Why has no one ever told me this? Like, why doesn't everyone know this? And so I got really passionate about it and healed that side of things through continued exploration and learning about all this juicy stuff.
And it's a non-linear path, right? Like, I think getting so fired up about it is the first step, and having that moment of like, what? Why has nobody ever told me this? Is so powerful. And I think probably so many listeners who are listening right now can identify with that, of just like, wait, what? And it's so liberating and it's so empowering. But like, then you are faced with the reality of like, what do I make myself for lunch now? And it's like, that's a trickier thing to unlearn those dieting rules in your everyday life.
Yeah, it's like someone's like, oh, hey, here's a new life and here's a new world you can live in, but you're a baby again. And so you still need to like learn to walk and navigate the world as a human adult, but with this in this new world. And and so you stumble, and sometimes you look back at the old place you used to be and be like, oh, is it better to diet? Oh, I don't know. And eventually you become stronger and learn how to navigate it. But still, even when you are, years in, there can still be things that trip you up and things that might trigger you, and days you don't feel as good as you do other days. So learn to be patient and kind with yourself, because like you say, it is a journey with ups and downs.
And I love that metaphor of like being a baby in a new world, it's like, because I think it is in many ways going back to how we were as babies. Like intuitive eating is what we all knew to start, and so, but like we feel so kind of like babes in the woods at first with intuitive eating, because it's like, okay, like now I have to relearn everything I thought I knew about what I liked or what foods were even an option for me at the grocery store, at a restaurant. And like I have to relearn everything I knew about portion size and like what I thought was enough food or what I thought I deserved or whatever, and so it's all of these things are just brand new again.
Exactly, right? And then trying to navigate getting away from shame at the same time, which is so powerful. And it's like you just want to be able to shake it off, but you can't, because it's like so deeply ingrained in our minds.
Totally. Yeah. How, like for you, when you were going through that process, because you'd had such complex layers of trauma from such a young age around food in your body, how did that show up and how did you navigate it?
So it was really difficult, and I was lucky because I have such a great therapist, and so for a lot of a lot of the trauma, we did something called EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization. I can never say that word.
Yeah, desensitization and reprocessing. I've done it too. It's amazing.
Right? It's the best thing ever.
So cool.
And so it really helped me break down fear and shame and all of these yucky type of feelings whenever they came up. And with that education that I was getting around food and how I shouldn't feel shame, anytime that I did, I would just say, this is interesting. What's going on here? Why am I feeling that I shouldn't eat this thing? Or if I do, that I'm a greedy fatty or something. And I would just notice and try not to put judgments on myself when things came up, because I would recognize that as a part of growth when I did have difficult feelings. And then I was able to navigate them a lot easier as soon as I just say, I noticed this feeling, and is it based in reality that I shouldn't eat this orange, or should I just eat this orange? And so that's what I had to do. But I had a stumbling block in regards to the partner that I had at the time. So I would go grocery shopping and I would buy all of these quote unquote bad foods, all the foods that I had never let myself eat. And then I would have them in the house and he would eat them before I managed to get my hands on them. And so I found that very difficult because I didn't want to shame him and say, don't eat that because I want to. But then I had this panic in my body knowing that really that food was going to go away and I better eat it now quick and, just like my childhood. And so eventually I had to say, food that I put in this one box over here is food for me. And so can you not eat that? But you eat anything else, but anything that I buy and put in this box, that's my food and it's helping me become relaxed around food. And that helped so much because the food would just kind of like hang out in the box and I'd just be like, yep, I have as much food as I need and it's not going anywhere. It's right there. And it made me feel safe around food and that I had as much food as I could ever dream of.
That's amazing. It's such a good tip for people who are maybe in the same boat, living with a family or people who maybe unconsciously, unthinkingly will take your food. It's like you can have a conversation about it and set some boundaries around it.
Yeah. And if, people, hopefully the people you live with love you and they want you to be happy and overcome any issues that you have. And so if you explain to them, hey, I'm really trying to work on this thing and this would really help me if you did this or whatever, or hey, if I buy myself whatever it is food, I'll buy you the exact same thing and you can have yours and, I'll have mine just while I am in this process, then, as long as they're not, an asshole, then they'll do it. They want you to be happy and mentally well.
Totally. Absolutely. I mean, I think the piece that's tricky sometimes is when like the people you live with are really caught up in diet culture and they have some judgment about the foods you're eating. They're like, oh, those are bad. Or why are you eating that? You're going to have a heart attack or whatever, all the stupid stuff.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And so it's I guess of trying to educate them as much as you want to, because obviously it's not your job to educate others, but to set boundaries and say, hey, can you not speak about food like that because it's making my brain sad in these ways. And hopefully if they love you, then they'll try and work on those things.
Totally. Yeah. And you have a right to set boundaries. I think that's something that people don't always recognize. And I was talking to someone recently who was like, I was saying something about boundaries and they were like, what do you mean? Like they didn't even know what boundaries were, and I was like, oh yeah, that's a buzzword that I learned in therapy 10 years ago or whatever, but I didn't know about boundaries for my entire childhood and like early 20s. I also did not learn about boundaries until very late in the game and went through a lot of trauma or just trauma that sort of taught me that I wasn't allowed to set boundaries and that I didn't have I didn't deserve to set boundaries or whatever. So there's a lot to have to like unpack and uncover before you can even feel deserving of setting boundaries. But I think the work that I do now, and I think the work you do now too, is to empower people to say like, yes, you absolutely deserve to set boundaries. You deserve to have your needs met. You deserve everything you need. And you don't deserve any of this bullshit that you're getting from diet culture or from the people in your life who are caught up in it.
And for me, boundary setting, and we mentioned about tied in with self-esteem. When you don't have self-esteem, setting boundaries is the scariest thing ever. I remember the first time trying out and setting boundaries, and it being absolutely fucking terrifying, and presuming that people's responses would be like, "What? You what? How dare you ask for this, you bastard?" And the more that I practiced it, if I, just being like, "Oh, hey, could you do this thing?" Or maybe not try to say that. And then people's reactions being like, "Yeah, sure." And me being like, "Huh? What do you mean?" And as well, then, sometimes people don't react positively, and then realizing, well, that's them. That's nothing to do with me. My boundary is still valid. And being able to push back when someone does go past a boundary. Like, for example, my mum, who was still steeped in diet culture, but she really loves me. She really wants to do better. And so I say to her, "Hey, can you not speak about food like this? Can you not speak about fat as a negative?" And sometimes she slips up. So I was trying on a dress for my sister's wedding, and I came out of the dressing room and she was like, "Oh, it makes your bum look really big." And that's, she crossed a boundary. And so I said, "Hey, you said my bum looks big, and it wasn't in a positive way. And I would prefer if you didn't say that." And her reaction was kind of like, "Okay, but gee, you're sensitive," sort of thing. And then I kind of then spoke about the fact that her reaction was like, "Wow, you're sensitive," and put it down to like, "I know you really love me, and I know you want me to feel confident and happy, and this is how you can do it, whether you agree with it or not, but this is how you can achieve that." And she was like, yeah, I can understand that now. I can get on board.
That's cool. Yeah. And acknowledging that people are coming from a good place, I think, is always such a good place to start,
Yeah. Like, my mum, like, never really, wanted to be a mean person and make me sad or upset, but she was doing the best she could. Sometimes she wasn't. And so setting boundaries is really an act of love when you do that.
Yeah, and an act of love for the other person and for yourself.
Yeah, totally. Because then you're giving people the opportunity to continue to build a relationship with you. Whereas if you don't have boundaries and you let people just walk over these imaginary boundaries you have in your head that you've not verbalized with them, then you're not giving them the chance to be close to you, because secretly you'll be like, "Fuck this person. I don't want to see them anymore," blah, blah, blah. But once they know what your boundaries are, then they can choose to stick to them or not, and potentially have you as a very close person in their life.
Yes, I was just talking about this on the podcast, and I think it's like the episode that's going to air the week before yours. So this will be a good recap of that too. Because I was saying on that episode that I used to walk around with such rage at the world because I didn't know how to set boundaries. I didn't even really, I had these boundaries in my head that I thought other people should be abiding by, but I was never able to verbalize them. I was never even really able to articulate them to myself. I just knew I felt like violated all the time. And so it was just like in such a rage all the time. And once I learned how to set boundaries, which involved, of course, like having enough self-esteem to know how to, to A, know what boundaries are, and B, knowing that I deserve to set them, I felt the rage just like diminish, to the point where I had a similar experience with a therapist who I saw for many years, who since moved away, but I saw her for probably 10 years straight. So late in our work together, we were talking about how I used to walk around the city just so mad at everything. And if someone talked to me, I'd be like, "What do you want?" And just always enraged, total, not even just resting bitch face, but active bitch face.
Isn't it hilarious that we presume people can read our minds and they know what we want and need, and when they don't, we're like, "Fuck them!
Yeah,
how rude are they? Oh my god,
their problem." Totally.
Yeah, and then but then I don't know about you, but I wouldn't end relationships with people. I'd just be like,
no, same.
Really hate them and be like, "Oh, I'm going to go spend more time with them," but then secretly the whole time being like, "Fuck you."
Totally. Me too. Yeah, because I didn't know that I had the right to end the relationship, really, but I would just either let it drift apart or just, keep spending time with people that I was not. And I wouldn't necessarily hate them. Some of these people are still my friends, but I was just always mad at them because they didn't know how to do right by me and I wasn't telling them.
Yeah. right? It's mad. It's so interesting. Like, and it could be that your boundary is like this tiny thing that's not even in their brain or
Yeah.
consideration, and you just have to be like, oh hey, when you come to my house, do you mind taking your shoes off? And
Right.
they'll be like, oh yeah, no problem. And then you can be like, oh, I don't hate you anymore.
Yes,
Thank God.
exactly. Instead of being like, oh, they're getting mud everywhere and I just cleaned it.
Yeah,
Like,
they're
oh,
doing this on purpose. They know that I
yeah,
hate this, and but you've never said anything.
exactly. Yeah. And then, oftentimes people, when you first do set a boundary and there's so much rage behind it, it's like sometimes people do react to that because it's,
Yeah.
the first time you set a boundary, it's kind of a shock, it can be like, whoa, I didn't realize. But,
Yeah.
if you can sort of get through that and recognize like, okay, the world didn't end just because this person might have had like a little bit of a surprise or shocked reaction that I finally did say the thing. And maybe also it didn't come out like perfectly. And my tone was a little angry because I've been holding so much back for so long. Like, of course, you're not going to say it in a way that's like, and there's no such thing as saying anything in a perfect way anyway. But of course, there's going to be some feelings involved, and that's okay too.
And as well, the chances of you potentially having a relationship with someone who doesn't care about your boundaries when you have low self-esteem is potentially higher. And so there may be times where you say, oh, here's a boundary, and the person doesn't react well because they're not that type of person to want to be a boundary respecting type person. If, you're in that habit of having relationships with people who are not healthy for you.
Totally. Like if that guy, that abusive 30-year-old guy when you were 17, if you had set a boundary with him and be like, no, I'm not going to follow your stupid diet, like he probably would have, gone into a rage and not heard that boundary. So that's not a person that's safe.
Exactly. Yeah. And so realizing that when you set boundaries that it can go lots of different ways, but most of the time, hopefully people are generally good people. Most of the time people are just going to be like, okay,
yeah,
it's not a big deal.
Right. Totally. And the people who have a really sort of scary reaction to that, that's a good clue that, okay, maybe this person isn't really safe. If they don't come back later and be like, I overreacted or whatever, or even if they do and that's a pattern for them, it's like, okay, well, probably should think about ending this relationship.
Yeah, it's like moving into healthy relationships and, how you might lose a lot of friends or family members and, that's okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really interesting piece of this too. Like, how did you navigate that? Because I'm sure with all you went through and all the people that you were around in your life who, of course, like we sort of find the people who mesh with us at whatever point of life and, however we feel about ourselves. So oftentimes that ends up being the really toxic, unsafe relationships when we have low self-esteem. So how did you go about sort of overhauling that and finding people who were actually healthy for you?
Yeah. So it was so hard and a really painful process to realize that actually this person is really bad for my mental health, and moving away from them or even ending relationships with family members, which is what I have done. And it's very complicated, but you're allowed to do it because your mental health is so important. And so relationships have changed. So from my hearing about my mum, you might be thinking, oh my God, your mum sounds horrible. You obviously don't have a relationship with her. But actually, I managed to heal my relationship with my mum, and we have quite a nice relationship now. And, I've got over my anger with her, and we've had lots of hearts to hearts. And the outcome of that is that we're learning to be the best versions of ourselves for each other and blah, blah, blah. Whereas with other people, it didn't work out like that. And the relationship changed or ended. So it wasn't just, let's just get rid of everyone in my life because clearly they're all awful because, they've made me into this person. And, it's not like that. There are, even if someone is problematic, they can potentially change and maybe they won't. But, if you like the person and you do want to try and keep them in your life, then it's potentially worth trying to see if you can get to a new stage in your relationship together. But then letting it go if it doesn't get there, because your mental health is so important.
Totally. And yeah, you don't have to bang your head against the wall trying to get them to change. If that's, you can sort of give them a chance and let it sort of work itself out for a little while and then make a decision at that point. And like, I think for me, when I was in that phase of such low self-esteem and not setting boundaries, and also really getting into relationships that weren't good for me, some of which were abusive, emotionally abusive, like I definitely kind of stuck around trying to, as my therapist said, like squeeze blood from a stone for too long, like that. And I forget, someone said recently, I was reading something or listening to something, but someone was like, if you're squeezing blood from a stone and you start bleeding, it was something like, you squeeze blood from a stone, like you make yourself bleed, and then you can make yourself think that there's actually blood coming out of the stone, but it's really just you, and it's like, oh, that's totally what I was doing, it was like giving 110% in those relationships and not having the person like meet me halfway.
Yeah. I really like that idea of, don't like the idea, but that's a really good analogy of the bloodstone thing.
Yeah, totally. It's such a sort of evocative metaphor. It sort of captures the pain of it too.
Because we do that, right? Mm-hmm. Because we want to keep on hold of people that we know, and it's easier that way. But
yeah. And we think they're, perfect for us in some ways, or there's something good about them. There's this kernel of like, oh, if only they could become the person that I want them to be, or that I see in them. But, sometimes people don't want to become that person either.
Exactly. Right. And that's a big pattern I had, is I would choose guys and my gut would say, they are not the right person for you, Victoria. And my brain would say, oh, well, I'm going to change them.
Yep.
And I'm going to make them into this person that I know that they can be. And I have learned to, when someone shows me who they are, to believe them.
Yes.
And, and even people would say to me, oh, Victoria, for example, I don't want to get married and have kids. And I would hear in my brain, oh, he does. He's waiting for the right girl, and it's going to be me. Mm-hmm. I'm going to, convince him. And at the end of the relationship, he'd be like, I told you I didn't want to get married and have kids. And I'll be like, yeah, but I thought I could convince you. Like, what the heck?
Right.
Yeah. So.
Oh, I feel that so hard. Like the like listening to people who, when they tell you who they are, I think is such a good lesson, because they really will. It'll happen pretty quickly, and you'll get that intuitive sense. But yeah, like you, I definitely sort of, let my brain win out, or convince me that my gut was wrong, and sort of trampled past it. Because again, like, when we come up in diet culture, we really learn to disconnect from our emotions and not listen to that intuition so young.
Yeah. And then the other layer, but if you have low self-esteem, that kind of scarcity mentality, I'd always be like, he's not the perfect fit, but he's close enough, when he really wasn't, because, I'm lucky that he would consider to be with me, because there's no other guys out there who would want to date someone like me,
Right.
And that wasn't true.
Totally. There's plenty of people out there for everyone, for all of us.
Billions.
Exactly. Literally billions. Yeah. No, and I think that's so huge when you can get to the point of being like, you know what? I think it's better to be alone than to be with this person that's causing me pain, or not the person that I want for whatever reason, not a good fit. And like, I'll trust that if I want to be in a relationship again, I will be, and that someone else will come along who's even better. And it's so hard to hold on to that in the moment. It's so hard when you're like, oh, but no one else gets me like he does, or whatever it is, It's like, no, actually there's probably someone someone out there who gets you like 20 times better than this person does, but it's just that's the best person that you've found thus far, and you're afraid that no one else is going to come along, but trust that they will.
Yeah, and it's a bizarre feeling to get to that point. Like, that's where I am now. I'm dating currently for the first time in 8 years, and 8 years ago I was not at the same place as I am now. And it's so strange to be able to easily and calmly be able to look at someone and be like, no, you're not the right one, and not think, oh my God, but it doesn't matter how he treats me. I need a boyfriend. I'm desperate. And to be like, thanks. It was great to know you, but I don't think we're the right match. And, the world doesn't end. And hopefully I will find a partner, but, maybe I don't. And either way, it's better to be single than to be with someone who is not the right person for you. It's a weird feeling to experience that.
Yeah, totally. I know. After you've been used to doing things a certain way. I had that experience too. I gave up dating for a year and I had had so much therapy, and knew before I gave it up for a year. I was making these choices of partners a couple more times after knowing full well what the patterns were, how I was sort of devaluing myself and choosing these people who weren't right for me. And I was like talking about it with my therapist. I was very conscious of it. And I was like, yeah, I know he's really problematic. And, this is exactly the same patterns we've been talking about, but I just have to do it anyway. I don't know why I can't stop, And like those last few ones were really instructive because I think it was helpful to go through that with that awareness, and also for my therapist to be like, okay, don't beat yourself up for doing this. There's clearly some sort of reason that you feel the need to do this, and you don't have to. And let's keep working on feeling like that you deserve better, And then when I chose to take the year off, I think it was a helpful way of just sort of integrating that knowledge and that awareness of like, okay, yes, I know what the patterns are. I know what to look for. I experienced it again with that awareness, and I got even more information and more sort of examples of like when someone is really wrong for me, how I can feel it in my body, how I can recognize it from the start, how I can trust my intuition. And now let's just sort of like rest and process that. It was like a shavasana at the end of a yoga class or something, And then when I came back, I was like, okay, I kind of get it now. I think I'm good at sort of crossing people off the list. And I met my husband pretty soon after, so.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
And maybe if you had continued dating and didn't take the year off, then maybe you would not have been in a place to find your husband or someone like him.
Totally, yeah. And I mean, with him, it's like this, it was this very weird sort of fateful thing where like we would not have met each other except for this one like week that we met. So, because he is an actor and he was doing like a regional theater contract, and I was on an improv team with a friend of his from acting school, and we were really close, and we had been on this team for like 3 years, and we were meeting to have our last team meeting and like break up because everybody was sort of going in different directions. One of our team members moved away, and Nate, my husband, came out with us that night, and it was like a week before, or it was maybe 3 weeks before he left on another regional theater thing, and there wouldn't have been another time our friend would have introduced us. So like it was just such a funny, like fateful moment. And yeah, so it was cool to have that experience. And I really do think that year off of dating and like more time, if some folks need more time and want more time, and that's awesome too. It doesn't have to be a year, but I think just whatever time you can take away to kind of reflect on what you really want. I feel like it did such wonders for my ability to be fulfilled in a relationship.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask you, like, falling in love with someone when you feel better about yourself as a human, is that a different experience?
Totally, completely different. My therapist had always likened it to the heat that comes from a radiator versus the heat that comes from like a bonfire or like a firework or something. And I was like, yeah, I get that. I had always been like, okay, I understand, but I don't really know exactly what that feels like. And I feel like it was, with my husband, it was that radiator thing. I was like, oh, I get it. I get what she was talking about. He was always there. He was consistent. He returned my texts. Just the really basic stuff from the get-go was there. And then we just kept building slowly on that. And it was terrifying. I was so scared because I was actually, just before I had met him, my first foray back into dating after that year off, I went out with this guy that I reconnected with someone that I had dated 6 or 8 years before briefly. And I should have, I did know better because I was like, I don't remember why I broke up with him, but he seems really cool and he's really together and seems to be looking for what I'm looking for. But then I realized through the process of going on a few dates with him, he's actually very selfish. And I didn't break it off with him. He broke it off with me, which was, of course, very much this, you can't fire me, I quit moment. But so I was feeling very down on the whole dating. I was like, maybe I should just go back to not dating. Maybe it's too soon. I don't know, like whatever. But then, so when I met my husband, it was all of this fear and sort of recently having been burned, just going back into the dating pool. I was definitely super scared. And yeah, it was just very different than anything I'd experienced. So it also was this discomfort of, I really like this person. I can tell in my body that I like this person a lot. And that's cool, but also terrifying because I had always kind of had mixed messages coming from my body. I had attraction, but also anxiety, like serious anxiety and sort of get out of here, this is dangerous kind of feelings. And I didn't have the danger feelings. I just had the happy attraction, sort of comfort feelings. And I was like, what does this mean? Am I okay? Is this okay? But he's interesting enough that it sort of worked. I think I had a few times before tried to force it with someone who I was like, this guy's nice. He's a really good person. I think he's given me what my therapist is talking about with the radiator thing, but it was actually, I just was sort of bored and not really intellectually or kind of emotionally satisfied by the person, even though they were actually really nice. And so those ones didn't work out. But I feel like with my husband, it was the sort of good personness was there. And then also, he's like interesting and cool and he's got cool stuff going on and he's a good listener and willing to get interested and invested in what I do for work and has a good relationship with food and his body and like all this stuff that I had come to realize I really needed and valued. So it was what I wanted and what I had always said I wanted, but not as obvious from the start. I think it was a more of an unfolding process.
It sounds like it's a lot of practicing these new concepts, and then when you first try it's kind of a little bit wobbly, and the more you practice it, the more it will be easier to recognize when someone is a good fit for you.
Yeah, it's almost, I think it's kind of very similar actually to giving up dieting and going back to intuitive eating, because there's this real wonkiness and discomfort and like, am I doing it right? Is this okay? Kind of feeling where you're like, I like this, but am I allowed to like this? Is something bad going to jump out from behind a corner? And then you sort of slowly settle into it and you're like, oh yeah, I know how to do this. This is something that is within my capacity to do, and I'm sort of clicking with it and I get it and I have muscle memory of how to do it.
Well, maybe one day when I come back on the podcast, I'll be like, well, I met my boyfriend by doing this and it's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to have a repeat episode because it sounds like you've got so much cool stuff going on in your life. And we haven't even really talked about your work. I mean, we have been sort of all throughout and talking about the self-esteem stuff and the intuitive eating and body image stuff. But tell us a little bit about your work and what you do and how people can connect with you and stuff.
Yeah. So what I do now, which I say is my life's calling, like this is the reason why I am put on this planet, is to teach women that they are incredible and to teach people to be confident and to love their bodies, because it changed my life and I know it changes other people's lives when they realize that. And so I have an e-course, I have a membership site, and I have a book that's coming out soon. And you can follow me on, I think I'm on pretty much all social media, and my handle is at @BamPowLife, which is my business name, BamPowLife.
I love it. Where did you come up with that? How did that name arise?
Well, originally I was coaching people on how to get a job, because I was in corporate recruitment for 8-9 years, and it was called BamPow Job. And so the idea was that it's not actually that hard to get the job that you want. You just need to decide and have the confidence, and you can just BamPow, go get that job that you want. And so then it evolved into coaching about confidence and whatnot, and then turned into BamPow Life.
Oh, that's so cool. I love it. And I think it is true of life too. It's like the life that you want is there and it'll fall into place once the sort of ingredients are there, and you have to get out of the sort of oppressive situations that you're in order to make it possible. And sometimes that is, takes some real doing, but it is available to you.
It is. Yeah. It's not like this fantasy fairyland, because that's what I always thought when I was younger. Like the idea of even basic things was just so out of reach. But the reality was it wasn't. I just needed to change my my self-esteem and my attitude about life.
Yeah, you don't have to try so hard, actually.
Yeah, just realize that you're a queen, no big deal.
Yeah.
And then just go out there and live your life like that queen you are.
Easy breezy.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. Well, we'll definitely put links to all your work in the show notes and stuff. And you said you have an e-course as well. How can people get that?
So you can jump onto my website and check out the tab that has Confidence Warrior e-course. And then there's also the Confidence Warrior membership site.
Oh, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure talking with you, Victoria. I could talk with you for several more hours.
I know. Oh my God. Will you be my best friend now? Okay?
Yes, please.
BFF forever.
BFF. Woo!
Thank you so much for having me. It's just an absolute treat to be able to talk to you.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. This is amazing. So that's our show. Thanks again so much to Victoria Welsby for sharing her story. Isn't that incredible and inspirational? And she's so great. And thanks to you for listening. You all are wonderful as well. If you're looking for some help getting started on your own anti-diet journey, grab my free audio guide, 7 Simple Strategies for Finding Peace and Freedom with Food. You can go to christyharrison.com/strategies to get it. That's christyharrison.com/strategies. If you've gotten something out of this podcast, please help us reach more people who need to hear the anti-diet message, because everyone does in this culture, am I right? And you can do that by sharing this episode on Apple Podcasts or iTunes or your favorite podcast platform. Sharing on one of the Apple platforms helps bring us up in the podcast rankings so that more people discover us, and so that we can continue to drown out all those other pro-diet messages in the health category, because God knows there are a lot. To get full show notes from this episode, including all the resources we discussed, plus a full transcript, head over to christyharrison.com/162. That's christyharrison.com/162. And to get the transcript, just scroll down to the bottom of the page and enter your email address. A big thanks to our editor and engineer, Mike Lalonde, as always, and to my Food Psych programs team, our community manager and content development associate, Ashley Saruya, our administrative assistant, Julianne Watasik, and our transcript assistant, Megan Saichi, for helping me out with all the moving parts that go into producing this show for you every week. Our album art was photographed by Abby Moore Photography and designed by Meredith Noble. And the music you're hearing behind me now is by a band called AWOL. And the track is called Food, used under the Creative Commons license. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, stay psyched.
Stupid or scared, no work in the kitchen now. Who put you there?